After a wave of rumors, it has finally been confirmed that Bandai Namco are developing Metroid Prime 4, one of Nintendo Switch's by far most anticipated games. But are they the right team for the job, and how far can they possibly be in development? Let's find out in this prologue to Inside Metroid Prime 4. Hello everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Inside Metroid Prime 4. So, it took a little under 8 months to learn who is developing the next grand installment in the Metroid series. And to put it lightly, it would have been a great surprise if it wasn't for the many rumors that have been circling around the internet. Anyway, according to Eurogamer's multiple credible sources, yeah, we know they burnt their fingers with Pokemon Stars, Nintendo have outsourced the development of Metroid Prime 4 to Bandai Namco, and more specifically, the newly found Bandai Namco Studios Singapore, which is much greater than you can possibly imagine. Let's get right to the big question. Is this a wise decision by Nintendo? The short answer is a clear yes. The reason for this is that despite being developed by a brand new studio, this doesn't mean that the staff is inexperienced. Far from it, since this division of Bandai Namco employs some of the greatest sci-fi game developers from the now defunct but extremely talented LucasArts Singapore studio. For anyone who doesn't know, this studio worked on none other than the highly ambitious Star Wars 1313 project. Sorry, Boba Fett, but it looks like the team that would envision your grand adventure will now take the helm and go behind the visor of your greatest rival. Needless to say, Nintendo and Metroid Prime producer Kensuke Tanabe couldn't have found a better team for Samus's grand return to the first-person adventure genre. With Star Wars struggling on the gaming Battlefront, this might be just the move Nintendo needs to make Metroid Prime 4 into a hit amongst both critics, but also in terms of sales. Let us explain. The LucasArts brand is renowned for their quality Star Wars games, and Nintendo must have seen the potential for Metroid to take a chunk of the Star Wars market, when Disney closed down the gaming division of LucasArts in favor of licensing the Star Wars brand to EA. We all know how well that turned out for EA and Disney. Unlike the disaster that was Retro Studios until they received the Metroid license and guidance from Shigeru Miyamoto, Bandai Namco Studios Singapore, or former LucasArts Singapore, knows what they are getting into. Their mission is simple and hard at the same time. Develop a next-gen first-person Metroid Prime adventure that will both impress and sell more than the original trilogy. Seeing that the Switch is selling like no system before in the US and that the US market is by far Metroid's most profitable market, there is no doubt that a Metroid Prime title with mind-blowing single-player and multiplayer modes could be the Battlefront killer that Nintendo have been looking for. As we all know, payback is a dish best served cold by former LucasArts employees. Don't believe us? Then take this. Based on the true endings of Metroid Prime 3 and Metroid Prime Federation Force, we know that Samus's main rival in this title will be none other than Sylux the Bounty Hunter from Metroid Prime Hunters. What could this mean that Samus, Sylux, and the other hunters will be presented together, say at least as playable characters in the game's potential online multiplayer mode? This isn't too far a stretch, seeing as Hunters was the only Metroid game with integrated online multiplayer, and the fact that this portion was highlighted by critics and players alike as the strongest aspect of the DS exclusive. We will go deeper into how the online multiplayer mode in Metroid Prime 4 could function in the next episode of this series, But for now, we can state that this game is most likely Nintendo's most serious attempt to carve its own spot in the online multiplayer shooter scene. With the Switch's paid online service launching this September, who knows how much Metroid Prime 4 could be a part of this plan, as we know that the Switch is lacking mature online multiplayer shooters. Now, we don't say that Metroid Prime 4 will come out this year, though it would have been great. But even in 2019, with a solid online multiplayer, this game could become for Nintendo Switch what GoldenEye was for the Nintendo 64. In other words, a solid multiplayer crafted by the multiplayer experts at Bandai Namco with no microtransactions, no loot boxes, will steal gamers' hearts and could even substantially increase the number of Switches sold, turning Metroid Prime 4 of all games into a system seller like the series has never seen before. As previously mentioned, online multiplayer is a topic we will dig much deeper into in the next episode. But as we all know, a Metroid game cannot only revolve around multiplayer. It first and foremost needs a well-crafted and scripted single-player adventure. And luckily here, the former LucasArts Singapore staff will also come in handy, as Star Wars 1313 was meant to have the following structure. In this cancelled game, you would play as a young Boba Fett, who would gradually change his armor until he would claim the beloved armor from The Empire Strikes Back. Wait a minute, this sounds familiar. Yep, the premise of upgrading your armor was to be remarkably similar to the one found in the Metroid series. You know, the power, Varia, gravity, etc. suits. It has previously been referenced that Metroid Prime producer Kensuke Tanabe will head the project, and is probably going to supervise that the game holds the quality and expectations that a Metroid Prime title has to hold. For those of you that are concerned or have little faith that this project won't do as well as you hoped, keep in mind that the first Metroid Prime had all odds stacked against it. Or so the fans had thought, since Retro Studios was an unproven developer, and placing Metroid in the first-person perspective angered a lot of fans. Ultimately, this rage went unjustified, as Metroid Prime went on to be the best-selling game in the franchise and solidified new groundwork for the series in the 3D space. At least for the next two sequels, Echoes and Corruption. Other M was interesting? And while we're at it, let's use the most recent example being Metroid Samus Returns, created by Spanish developers Mercury Steam. Before giving us this fantastic 2D Metroid on the 3DS, they were known for the mediocre Castlevania Lords of Shadow games. A pretty great turnaround if I do say so myself. What we can infer from these examples is that leadership is key when it comes to the Metroid games. Kensuke Tanabe leading the production of the Prime trilogy worked out great in the end, and Yoshio Sakamoto redeemed himself from Other M with Samus Returns. It also helps that Nintendo is absurdly strict when it comes to quality control. Most of the time, anyway. Even so, if Metroid Prime 4 doesn't come out this year, which is pretty much a guarantee, a great way to keep the hype flowing this year is by releasing the Metroid Prime trilogy on the Nintendo Switch a la the Halo Master Chief Collection. Slap some sweet HD textures on those babies and change around the motion control puzzles and corruption, and we have something to enjoy while we wait for the fourth installment. It also helps in the regard that a lot of people missed out on the Metroid Prime trilogy, so throwing these games on the insanely popular Nintendo Switch would give these owners 3 new games to play for the price of 1. A great deal considering the Prime trilogy is one of the greatest game trilogies ever. Anyway, girls and guys, this was just the beginning of our Inside Metroid Prime 4 series. We'll be back in the near future to talk about what an online multiplayer component could be like if implemented in the game correctly, so stay tuned for that. If you liked this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you're new to check out our other series, including Inside Pokemon Switch and Game vs. Game. We'd also like to give a big shout out to our patrons, including Patreon royal producer Kenyatta Ali for their generous contributions. We're sending out the first batch of exclusive pins for our $5 and up patrons, so if you'd like to get one of these bad boys, then head on over to patreon.com/commonrealm and contribute $5 or more for at least 2 months. You'll also have access to exclusive perks such as our weekly podcast. In the meantime, this has been the Commonwealth Realm, and we will see you girls and guys soon.